Welcome in to the Husker247 HoopsCast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson here on Tuesday morning as we talk about Nebraska's latest win, a 64-50 victory over the Rider Broncs, who were in town for the Cornhusker Classic. BC, do I have this correct? Am I getting everything right here?
Yeah, that was a Cornhusker Classic W.
Yeah, I mean, you don't apologize for those. You get
No,
them, you appreciate them, you move on to the next one, and that's what Nebraska did on Monday night. And so the last time it came to you, they were coming off of I thought a pretty nice showing last Monday with their win, and then the last couple games against Florida A&M and here against Rider have given us probably a chance to espouse a few different things, Brian. A little bit of a struggle for Nebraska against Rider on Monday night.
they weren't very good offensively. In fact, they made 7 shots in the second half. So it was rough on that end. It felt like, what were the turnovers? Let's see. 11 turnovers. It felt like more.
Yeah, it did. It really did. It was
Um
very sloppy.
now the refs were letting them go a little bit. So there was a lot of it was a very handsy game. And Ryder was getting physical, but man, Ryder was getting their hands on the basketball a lot, and it just felt like there was like 4 or 5 possessions in a row where Nebraska didn't really function without being in a very stressful situation or just flat out losing the ball. I think they're still trying to figure it out at the point guard spot. Jamarcus Lawrence, good looking player. Like when you see the starting 5 on the court, you're like, man, that looks right. But he's growing in that role. It's just different to him, and it's going to take time. And so I think if there's a real blessing for this team, it's the schedule. Not to knock all these teams, but it gives an opportunity for a guy like him to make some mistakes, to see, okay, that should have went a different way, and hopefully learn from it by the time you see some better competition.
Yeah, and last night was also the first time that we've seen Keisei Tominaga, and he had to knock a little rust off. I feel like you could have, if there was such a gambling prop for it, you could have bet that he was going to shoot the first time he touched that ball on uh, on Monday night, and he did hit a couple 3-pointers in succession, and that got the place a little bit fired up. We got our first Tominaga going down to the far end of the court to bounce into the hoop,
Yeah,
which is his, I guess, trademark celebration at this point. It was where my
yeah.
seats are. He's coming right at me, and it's always amusing to watch the opposing team just sort of like gawking at him, like, "What is this guy doing?" And then he bounces into the padding and turns around and trots back to the bench, and you can just sort of see the confusion from the Riders players' faces. But
Yeah.
for the rest of us, we're kind of used to it. So nice to see Tominaga back. Definitely had some rust. Definitely needed to knock it off. And as you said, they're sort of working through what they're going to look like, what rotations are going to look like, and trying to figure out the point guard thing. The box score is particularly ugly. You look at these numbers, and especially with Jamarcus Lawrence, it's tough because you have such fond memories of him with that Iowa game last year, BC, where he just sort of took over in key moments in that game. And then you're watching him play Ryder, and he's 0 for 5, no points. He's got a couple assists. It's not like he's not contributing, but it's just a little odd just seeing it. He felt off all game, and he looked off all game.
Yeah, he was 0 for 5. He was they were plus 18 when he was on the court, which he had the best plus minus. So, I mean, there were some good things, but played 24 minutes, almost 25. Let's see, they charged him with just 1 turnover. So that, I mean, that statistically not bad there, but yeah, we are very used to him as that guy at the end of last year who hit like 4 threes a game. You were kind of counting on that down the stretch run. He'd have about 12 points, and they were kind of all timely shots. And so he's probably recalibrating his game a little bit right now. He's a very good defender, though, and that shouldn't be lost, and that probably contributes to that plus minus, and it's why they're going to need him on the floor a lot. He takes a lot of pride in that, and we'll get to that part, I'm sure. But I mean, that was the positive from this game. It's that Nebraska, where a couple of years ago they would have been in trouble in a game like this. It would have been one of those games. It's like 64-62. Someone, has a shot at the end. Maybe Nebraska wins, maybe they don't, the way the Huskers played offensively. But because they were so sound on the defensive end of the court, ends up being kind of a comfortable win by the end of it.
Yeah, sitting there, I never felt like Nebraska was going to lose that game. It just felt like you weren't going to see, the last week version of them where they're just flowing, running down the court, everything they're shooting is going in. They had to work a lot more for it. But you can certainly see that they have the ability to play ugly. The hard part is when that offense is just not clicking, it just looks really bad to watch. I mean, you have 5 guys standing around the key. The Seinfeld chucking reference comes up in the audience. Everyone's pointing out the chuckers because there's just nothing falling. I mean, they're shooting wild threes, or you have Alec trying to take the ball in from the top of the key into the paint while dribbling it, which doesn't seem like a recipe for success. Like there's just either everybody's doing too much or not enough, and it just sort of looks pretty bad when those shots aren't falling at times.
Yeah, it does. And going back to the second game, which happened after our first podcast, obviously they won handily against a bad team, but that was another tough offensive game in a lot of ways. And in the first half, they're driving the ball in and getting stuck, without being able to kick it out. And then the second half, they're making an extra pass when they didn't need to make an extra pass. So I think they're still sort of figuring that out a little bit. Sometimes there's been opportunities for guys almost right at the rim to make a play, and then they try to make that one more pass, and it ends up just throwing the rhythm off, or they turn it over or something like that. So there's been a little too much of that, probably the last 2 games out. And I did think this was going to be a tricky game against Rider in a way. I didn't think it'd be a single digit game or anything, but Rider had actually out rebounded Marquette, even though they got smoked by them. And they're the pick to win their league. Like they've got 3 guys, I think, who are 5th-year players and 2 guys who are 4th year. And it's a very veteran team. So you kind of knew they were going to come in and not be intimidated, and they were going to fight. And it would be more of your 10 to 15 point game, I thought, going in. So I wasn't surprised in that way. That said, though, the offense has to get crisper. And the beauty is you've got, you got Stony Brook on Wednesday, you got Oregon State Saturday. There's a chance to try to get in a little bit of a rhythm here. You're going to be covering that game Saturday for us. This is a big week. Like if they can figure a couple things out on offense, and you wake up Sunday morning 5-0, you'll take that, and you'll just try to keep growing.
Yeah, some of it too. I just thought Rider came out right away, just a lot of effort. Like you could tell that they were coming into Lincoln and they wanted to leave with a win. Like this wasn't just a show up and get your shots in kind of game. Like they came in and came out swinging. They had a lot of energy from their bench right off the bat. And I wouldn't say Nebraska came out flat, but it just it didn't feel like they were prepared to kind of match where Rider was at the beginning of that game. And it's weird because you talk in these tones, and you would think like that meant that Rider was out in front by 12 points. No, it was never that kind of game, but it just never felt like Nebraska, at least early on, was in there just sort of swinging. And so I thought that a lot of credit goes to Rider for that, just the way they started the game and kind of got Nebraska on their heels right away. And then they had to scramble a little bit. I have a couple rotation questions for you. Should we save those? Should we go to a quick timeout here and then come back with a little bit of that, or what are you thinking here?
We can take a timeout as the other team's on a 9-0 run. Maybe get a timeout. see if our veteran leadership can respond to it.
Yeah, it's really bad on this podcast. The other team always gets out on a run, and then we got to take a quick stop here to catch up. So we're going to do that. We'll be back here in a little bit. All right, BC. I was getting texts last night. People want to know where Eli Rice was when Nebraska was kind of struggling to score, giving his big performance that he had against Florida A&M last week.
Yeah, that's an interesting. He only played 3 minutes 17 seconds. He hit his one shot. Fred Hoiberg has said this is going to be the tricky part. It's kind of a good, tough thing to have for a coach, but you're going to have to get basically 11 or 12 guys down to your 8 or 9, at some point in the season. I may be a little surprised Eli didn't play more, but that part of that was just the way the game went, and they were locking him up defensively. I think he's still growing on that end of the floor. You didn't want to play with fire too much when it's a game that turns into a 47-46 contest with 10 and a half minutes left. And so I wonder if that was part of it. We didn't ask specifically about it, so I don't want to speak out of turn and say something that isn't right on why his minutes were down. But that would be my best guess, is like he's a young player who's still figuring out a little on the defensive end. This was kind of a grinder game, and maybe it just the way the score played out, even though Nebraska won by 14, they sort of had to have that. Tominaga hit the 2 threes to get it to 7, but then it wasn't like they just popped it out to like 15. It was sort of a slow and steady. They kept getting stops. It got up to 10, up to 12. And so it was one of those games where maybe you didn't feel completely safe until like the under 4 timeout or whatever. And at that point, guys are just taking up the garbage minutes. So that's a good question, though. It'll be something to watch against Stony Brook. I would guess that's a game they can open it up a little bit more, and hopefully you can get some more clock.
Do you feel like we have a good, obviously Juwan Gary is going to come back. We don't know when, if Blaze Cato will be able to help this year, but do you feel like we have a good indication that the 8 guys that Nebraska went heavy with minutes wise? I mean, you had the most with Alec from 30 down to the least Coleman of those 8 with 18. Do you feel like those, the 8 guys who played the most minutes last night, do you think that's probably what we're going to see moving forward once they're able to incorporate Juwan Gary making that 9? Like, is that sort of you think that's kind of the set top 2 units, if you will?
Feels like a pretty safe guess. I mean, you're talking about a lot of experienced guys in that group. So Eli is the guy who, maybe he is going to pop up at some point. There's going to be an injury or something, and he's going to be important in January. But for the time being, we have to remember he's a first-year freshman. He's going to grow a lot behind the scenes with these guys, but maybe he does fall back a little bit on the rotation, because Wilcher is someone in particular. I think everyone is always kind of like, oh, maybe he gets knocked down a little bit. He was their best guy in the first half. He was kind of what kept them afloat. He had 11 of his 13 points, hit all 3 of his 3-pointers. And he started the season pretty strong, really. I know the competition hasn't been great, but for what it is, he's looked confident on the offensive end. And I think he's avoided some of those plays in traffic that have really hindered him previously in his career, where he gets, into trouble, dribbles off his leg or something, has 3 or 4 turnovers. He hasn't had those type of games yet. So he's been encouraging. And then Sam, you just know, is dependable. Sam's going to, get his hand on the basketball and do some pretty good stuff for you whenever he pops out there. So it's hard to not have him. And then Jerron Coleman gives you another option at point guard, and he's a veteran and all that stuff. So that's where it's hard to imagine someone sort of knocking any of those guys off their platform, to me. We'll see though.
Yeah, it's a good point you raised about Wilcher. The other thing about him, I mean, he's been in there getting rebounds. I feel like it's more noticeable than we've seen. I feel like the group that they've assembled, Brian, and again, I was at 2 of the 3 games. I don't know, maybe it was different with Florida A&M, but the group that they've assembled, they have a lot more willing kind of like dirty work guys, if you will, like guys that are, Bryce Williams, you notice, was getting there grabbing rebounds. Of course, Alec is in there getting there grabbing rebounds. I feel like that's somewhat infectious. So you have Wilcher, who at times it felt like last year was not the best at boxing out or getting in there and preventing teams from getting offensive rebounds and continuing possessions. It was nice to see him. I think he had 5 rebounds, maybe 6 in the contest. And so it's good to see. I like seeing, those are sometimes that's all you can sort of control. If you have an off night shooting, whatever it is, but you got to be able to put value out there on the court. And I noticed that out of Wilcher. One thing I'm curious for you, with having been to all 3 games, and if you think this is more of a sign of just, what happens early in November basketball, or if you think this is the sort of thing that Nebraska can sustain. I don't know if you've noticed this, Brian. They're shooting a hell of a lot of free throws.
Yeah.
Like, they've shot nearly 100 free throws, or, probably like 90 free throws in 3 games so far. Like it's a large amount, and I don't know how sustainable that is to their offensive effort. But it's obviously the more you can get to the line, and they're shooting them at a pretty decent clip so far this year, the more points you can sort of add while you're trying to figure out the run of your offense.
Yeah, they were 17 of 22 from the line last night, so that's pretty good. And the thing I like is the big guys go up there and you're confident Rink can make them, and he's going to get to the line. And he was 4 of 5. Alec was 4 of 6. Bryce Williams was 4 of 5. So there isn't that one guy so far who's gone up there and you're like, no chance. Like if he gets 1 out of 2, thank your lucky stars
Doesn't
sort
feel
of
like
deal.
they have that kind of guy. Like it, they're definitely better shooters than others, but I haven't noticed anyone whose form is so bad. I'm like, oh, I don't want to see that guy in late
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah, that was a key to the game last night, really, was in the first half. I think they had at least 2 1-on-1s where they made both.
Mhm.
So you're talking about a 4-point swing that you and I know there's been teams in the past that's a 0 trip on
Like
both
go
times.
back 2 years.
Yeah. So let's take those off the board. It was a 9-point game at halftime, kind of a tight deal. That's why this would have been a game in past years. Is like they wouldn't have been quite as good defensively, and they wouldn't have been as good at the line, and they would have missed some of those 1-on-1s, and it would have been 3 or 4 point game at half, and then you get a little nervous about it, and who knows what can happen if you get in the final 6 minutes and it's close. So that's encouraging so far. I don't want to, let's not go overboard yet. Let's see how they hit them as they go forward. But it does seem like everybody's got a pretty good stroke up there, and it's good to see the big guys feel confident doing it.
Well, and just the volume is what stands out. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't recall Nebraska's previous teams under Hoiberg shooting this many free throws, other than maybe I feel like oh, Alonzo is Verge, right? Like Alonzo Verge.
Yeah.
I was blanking on the name, and then it popped in, and then I was like, "Is this even right?" I'm just going with it.
Alonzo
I
Verge Jr.
He got to the line, Bryce got to the line, but I don't recall them having a lot of 20 attempt days, and to have 2 of them right away at the beginning of the year and then one in the 30s. Like that's pretty remarkable for Nebraska. Because conference play will get here and they'll get to the line 6 times probably. Like that's how that seemed to go for them. So that's definitely stood out for me. Another thing I want to try to get to here. We haven't really had much of an opportunity to talk a lot about him. He didn't play the first week or the first 2 games of the season. What in your mind, Brian, is like a realistic expectation for Keisei Tominaga? Like I think it's hard to try to rein it in, but what do you think it actually looks like beyond just a really, really hot month of February that was Keisei's 2023 so far?
I think the best thing about Keisei this year could be actually the part we're not going to talk about as much, and I think he's improved a lot on the defensive end, and that allows him to, you're not thinking like, okay, yes, he's fun and a scorer on this end, but he's a liability on the other end. I think he's worked hard to become that overall solid player. I'm not saying he's like a lockdown defender or anything, but he played well on that end of the court, even when his shot wasn't falling. And that's something that Hoiberg pointed out in the post game. Everybody did that really well last night, because it's hard to do when you're 1 of 9 at some point on your stat line, and it's easy to fall off and lose concentration on the other end. So he didn't do that. I'm not worried about the shot at all. That's Captain Obvious stuff. Even though he started 1 of 10, I didn't think like, oh, this is. I mean, they were online. It was just one of those deals where you just had to
They
get.
were all open looks. Like that's
Yeah.
part of it to me is like when he is going to be on. I mean, they could blow a team out pretty quickly if they're getting that open of looks.
I thought it was actually sort of the perfect game because it didn't just happen easy right away for him, and there was a build up, but then he hit those 2 big shots that sort of the team needed that were a catapult. So that you actually, I don't know if you could have drawn it up any better as far as getting a guy here's how to knock the rust off. We're going to make it a 1-point game, and then you're going to hit 2 from the corner, one that's kind of behind the backboard, as Hoiberg said. which is it's the fun part of Keisei, is he's that guy who, yeah, I've missed 5 or 6, but high degree of difficulty, bring it on, and knocks it down. And you kind of knew then Jamarcus Lawrence wisely fed him then the next possession. It's like, get him another. And you knew that was going down. So that was good. I think it's going to be a fun show. I do with him. I really think he's going to heat up, and he's going to have some nights where we're just like having a ball, like watching him, score 31 points in some non-conference games. We'll see if he can carry it over into the conference play. The thing that'll be interesting, though, if we're going to look at the other side of it, is he was so good last year playing off Derrick Walker and getting those like easy buckets. He had such a high field goal percentage on 2-pointers, and he moves great without the ball, and people don't give him enough credit for that. And he's going to continue to do that, I'm sure, but he does have to develop that connection and the other guys with him on how they play off of one another. And that's what I would say is sort of still, you can tell, is kind of waffling a little bit in the first week or so, when you watch him on offense. It's like there's not quite that dialed in thought of like, oh, this is what this guy does here. And sometimes you can tell where the passes go.
Yeah, I am really excited to watch he and Rink Mass sort of go to work in that 2-man game. Because if you overcommit to Keisei, and Rink can just step back and you're giving him a straight on 3-pointer, like he can make those shots and he can roll to the rim. You can, he's more agile and more physical than I thought he was going to be. And so I'm really curious what that looks like when they can put it together. And then you can sort of also work in Alec to a degree. I think he could play a decent 2-man game where you can lob it into him if they overcommit to the threes. And we saw that last night where when all the attention is drawn out to that 3-point line, you got a guy like Keisei who's willing to make that pass, goes up for the 3, fires in the pass right for the dunk to Alec.
Yeah.
Like, they can work off of their ability to shoot and the general fear that Keisei and you assume Mast and Bryce Williams and those guys can put into other defenses. Like there's going to be set up for some really nice passing, which gets me really excited. You want to talk about the part of basketball that's kind of dorky, but I just love it. Like I love good cross-court passes.
Do you like a good bounce pass?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I hate the power dribble, love the bounce pass. That's where I'm at with it.
Were you too young, or did you like Jason Williams when he was with the Kings? You like that show?
When he went to Rand High School with Randy Moss, and
of course you had to like him.
I'm well aware of Jason Williams, so there's no doubt about that. Yeah, no, everybody white. What is it? White chocolate? That was Jason Williams.
Yep, that was him.
I like good passing. What can I say?
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see how that offense builds off of each other. And then you have, I think Bryce Williams, CJ Wilcher, like you have these other complementary pieces that can knock down these big shots. And so you can't just overcommit to Keisei. And I think that's going to be the fun part. Like when this works, it could look really pretty. Like they could really set this up and kind of be a dizzying array of ball movement to open guys that are going to have a lot of confidence that they're going to get a look that they like and that they can knock down. And if they start knocking those down, it's going to allow Nebraska to have some really interesting runs. Now, the flip side of that is what we saw on Monday night. Like you don't knock those down. You are setting up those easy looks. You just have to kind of shoot your way out of it. Like that's going to be the tough part for the fans, I think too. Like it's not going to be, oh, we've missed all these threes. Now we're just going to try to dump it in for easy baskets in the middle. No, they're just going to keep trying to shoot. Like I think they're going to live by the 3, die by the 3. I just think that's what this team is. It's ultimately going to be most nights.
Yeah, they were 2 of 14 from 3 in the second half. But you're right on there's going to be some late finds that are going to be fun, like where a guy's in the middle of his jump shot, then it's like, rifled in like the one to Alec, and they've had like 5 or 6 of those already this year. So that's an encouraging part. And also Rink's going to be just a fun player this season because he's so he's just going to be dependable. I feel like, I mean, it wasn't like he played an extraordinary game last night. No. He didn't. Yeah. I wouldn't say it was, he would probably say it wasn't a good game for him. And he had 12 and 13, so when you can't take for granted when you've got that sort of space carver guy like him who just finds his way to the ball. He's kind of a tougher. I think he's kind of one of those offensive players that's a little awkward for defenders to guard sometimes, and he's able to get some space and get some easy buckets at times. So he's had 2 back-to-back, double doubles that are very easy, even when he hasn't been at his best all the time. So that says something.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Bryce Williams so far through 3 games? I mean, we've talked a lot about Rink Mast and Alec, and I think in some ways for Nebraska to exceed the success they had last year, they have to find another kind of group of 3 that they had in Greisel and Walker and Tominaga. And we know for sure Tominaga and Mast. Do you think that Bryce Williams can be that sort of third key person? Or if it's not him, who do you think it could be?
I thought and he still might be. I thought he'd be more of a scorer than he has been so far.
Just struggle on Monday for sure.
Yeah. He's 1 of 6, 7 points. He had 8 rebounds though. So that's the part where you got to look at the whole box with him, because he's one of those, just a guy with length, 6'8" guy who you can use on the perimeter to guard. And he's part of the reason why the other team's going on a scoring drought and has only 50 points by the end of the night. So whatever wasn't happening on the offensive end, he's going to make up for it by being a nuisance with just his size and his versatility on the defensive end. That said, I'm kind of hoping the offensive game comes along a little bit more, because he's been described by Hoiberg as like a 3-level scorer, a guy who can sort of do it in all different ways. And so far, the ball just hasn't gone on the hole probably as consistently as he would want it. So we'll see if, sometimes early on, you've seen that with guys, the first 5 or 6 games out of the gate aren't great, and then they start to find something. So maybe he will on that end, but that's the part I'm still kind of looking for.
Yeah, we haven't talked a lot about what Hoiberg sort of said after the game. What were just kind of his initial thoughts and sort of just his outlook on the week ahead with these 2 other games here?
He just said that the defense has to be that calling card standard where it's like, okay, there's going to be nights when you're not efficient on offense, when it's a little sloppy, but that's always got to be there to level things off for you. So I think he was really proud of how they played on that side of the floor. And he just said what everybody thought and was obvious. So the offense didn't look really in sync. It just wasn't that good. And a quick, scan of the numbers shows it. It was a day where they shot 33% by the end of the game. So, and I felt like they were not strong with the basketball sometimes. So, as we said earlier, there was 11 turnovers, but it sometimes seemed like more to me. I was surprised it was actually that low, and they had turnover problems in the second game. So that's something I think they've got to get figured out. I think he's kind of excited that this is a busy week. He said it's great for players. They love those weeks where it's like game, and you only have like one practice and you sort of just do a lot of mental prep. So they have sort of an off day on Tuesday, like not like it's more of a mental day. And then, Stony Brook comes in Wednesday, and it's sort of a good early test of like how quickly you can come back from a game and respond. So we'll see. Stony Brook, they're not great. They got whooped by Duquesne the other day. They did play St. John's too. I think it was a 16-point game or something like that. I don't actually know how good St. John's is. There's a lot of buzz because of Patino. I don't know if they're that good, but
they have CJ brother. I can tell you that.
Yeah. It's going to be, so this should be a game. I think Nebraska, you're hoping they can open it up a little bit more and look crisper on offense, because I think the level's going to be a little bit down from Rider, who I do think was a solid team. I think Rider could be one of those teams. It's always kind of fun when you get to March. You're like, oh, Nebraska played them, like back. They might be one of those teams. We'll see.
Yeah, I think it worked out really well. It's a good test that they had early in the week. I think the physicality of that game is good. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know what Oregon State is, but I think it's good to be in that sort of a matchup at least once before you're taking on a fellow, power conference basketball team like they will on Saturday. And we'll see sort of what Wednesday looks like as well.
Yeah.
All right, Brian.
go
ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and you can fire off some hard hitting questions after that one Saturday.
Yeah,
You should
I
come
will,
hard. You should come hard in the paint with some stuff.
certainly need to based on what we're hearing from our football questions. So maybe I'll treat basketball as the training ground for asking hard questions.
Guys are soft. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should
That'll be
really get into the rotation questions pretty big time with him.
That'd be great. I'm just gonna have Hoiberg staring at me like, what the hell is this? Who the hell are you? That'll be good.
No, that'll be a cool environment. Is that your first time going there?
Yeah, I have not been to the Pentagon, either that one or the one in DC.
Okay.
So I'm excited. I'm going in this order, by the way. I'd rather go to this Pentagon first. I don't have as much interest in the other one, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Sioux Falls is always fun too. I'm curious what the crowd is going to look like. I had friends that went when they played Oklahoma State. I heard that environment was really fun. I'm not expecting as many. Sounds like they still got plenty of tickets left. So if you're looking for a weekend trip, Sioux Falls, you can head up there to that. I'm curious what that crowd is going to look like, what the environment kind of looks like, and if it's basically just 95% Nebraska fans.
What's the tip time for that? I forget.
I believe it's a 3 p.m. tip.
Okay.
And Nebraska football plays at 6:30.
People have time. They can go there, find a sports bar. They'll be all right.
Yeah, it'll be good. You could probably find me wandering around downtown Sioux Falls after, finishing up coverage of the basketball game, trying to figure out somewhere to watch football. So that's a bonus for everybody as well. Anything you want to add here before we depart?
I got nothing more to say. We'll have a lot more to talk about next week, I think. So the Oregon State game will give us something to. I need to get my Peacock fired up here to. Should have phrased it differently, but
yeah, phrasing is a problem for our team. But yes, continue.
I have to get Peacock going here, and so I can watch that one.
All right. For Brian Christopherson and his fired up Peacock, I am Mike Schaefer. Husker 247. You're listening to Husker 247 HoopsCast.